Okay, nice reminder. Just for, I'll say this now so I don't say it a little bit later, to get a concession on parking, could you take your parking ticket to the CEO Institute desk before you go, and they'll give you the appropriate relief on parking, so when you leave you can get a discount. Okay, we're going to move on to our final session for the day, which is going to be focused a little bit more on the one topic that I think both Peter and Warren said, and I think all of us would recognise is the common link in every syndicate and probably always has been, people. So we're going to, our next speaker is Simon Meyer, and Simon is going to talk us through what is best practice, what are the things that every CEO should be aware of when it comes to talent attraction, talent development and talent retention. Simon is someone who is always challenging the status quo. He founded the Australian super boutique Future You recruitment on the belief that there is a better way to connect outstanding talent with local businesses. He started out in the recruitment industry in Sydney more than 20 years ago, and as regarded as a leading talent partner for organisations in the market. His extensive experience in this market and globally sees him regularly called upon for insights on the Australian executive employment market, workplace culture, diversity, leadership, and as a result, more broadly, business trends. To talk to us about this most important and prevalent subject, please welcome Simon Meyer.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, mate.
You're a tough audience, mate.
Yeah, no, last person. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Tim. Very kind. I thought I'd start just by sharing my experience with the Institute so far. So I've been a member for 2 years, and I sit in Syndicate 65, which is chaired by Peter Jolly. I feel very privileged to be in that group. We have a lot of fun together, but I think a few people have touched on it. It is a real cone of silence environment for us, and we share a lot of stories, both personal and from a business perspective. And as a CEO of a fast-growing startup, that's been invaluable for me along my journey so far. I would just like to share one story. I had a crisis with my board. So what Carl was talking about this morning and also what Peter touched on really resonated with me, and I had to call my chairman to gain some advice. So I called Jolly and I said, look, mate, I've got a problem. Can we get together? And he goes, yeah, sure. I'm actually around the corner. I'll be there in 1 minute. And so Peter came up and he assured me that is his standard response time to a crisis from a member in one of his syndicates. So if you haven't met Peter and you'd like to come and see what Syndicate 65's like, feel free to have a chat over lunch. So I'm the closer today, and I'm conscious that everybody's been sitting down for about an hour and a half in the second part of the morning session. So can I just ask everybody to stand up and sit down 2 times fast, please? Just get a bit of energy and blood flow back in the system, and most importantly, some oxygen coming up to the brain. Because the next hour is a very important subject, and I think in most of the syndicates, I'd imagine, as you go through your sessions, the subject often deviates back to people and how we solve the challenge of finding great people, but probably more importantly, in the context of 2018, how you then develop talent, and ultimately, by doing that, how you retain the best people in the marketplace. So it's great to be able to talk to you about that. And I want to break the presentation down into 2 sections. So I'm going to spend a bit of time on the attraction piece. And I've got some intel for you on the CEO market, so that might be interesting. And then I'd like to focus on development, some of the best things that we're seeing across the market. So a few areas to go through. So just a quick recap on the Future You story, because one of the things that we talk a lot about when we go into the market is our own journey in terms of attracting talent and then how we've developed talent. So our business literally started 2 years ago in a coffee shop, and Richard Wynn, who's sitting here on table 3, is the co-founder. And we scratched our heads a couple of years ago together and started Future You. And we've literally gone from a coffee shop to just under 100 people across Sydney and Melbourne. And a lot of people say, you guys are crazy, in terms of trying to achieve that growth in 2 years. But with a careful plan around how we were going to attract the right people and then how we wanted to develop the business within Future You, we've managed to keep that group together and form a pretty good helicopter view on what drives the Australian market. And so one of the reasons I can stand here now, 2 years later, and share with you what we're seeing across the market is because we put a lot of thought into our startup environment and what we wanted to achieve from a people perspective, and it's been very much at the heart of our success so far. So I think a really good place to start this discussion is pulling back and just thinking globally about the mega trends that are constantly referred to in terms of the workplace of the future. So I agree with Katie, if you just do a really simple Google search, punch in the words workplace of the future 2030, brings up an incredible amount of material, usually provided by one of the big four consulting firms or some authority out of the US. The problem I have with that is that it doesn't necessarily always get to the heart of the challenge around talent and people in the context of the Australian market. But let's start here and just pick up on a couple of the mega trends. So the first one that comes up all the time is the rise and rise of the millennial, and how do you engage a millennial on the journey that they want to experience from a career perspective, because it is different to the journey that many of us in the room have gone on over the past 15, 20, 30, 40 years. And it's one where they genuinely want to embrace the concept of freelancing or the sense of freedom around who they engage with from a leadership perspective and what type of organisation they put their time and energy into. And if you can't demonstrate to them that you have alignment with their personal sense of purpose and values, you'll pay dearly for it and they'll move on. So that's a global trend, no doubt about that. The second one that comes up all the time is that all the great jobs are going to be replaced by some form of artificial intelligence or cognitive tech within business or automation. And I think the interesting thing about that point is no one really talks about, once we see a change in terms of the workforce associated with those trends, what imagination is being put into the roles that actually will be created. And I think the current group of leaders in the C-suite in a market like Australia actually are in a very privileged position to influence and imagine what a role could look like in an organisation beyond the introduction of technology. But most people that I talk to are quite nervous about that. And the third trend, which I wanted to touch on, is that there is a huge rise in the contingent workforce around the world. So the number of people that are choosing to work on their terms, not necessarily on a full-time basis, where they put the hard yards into an organisation for 3 to 5 years, is definitely on the rise, and that trend's not going to go away. So you've got a choice, I think, in the next couple of years in terms of how you deal with the mega trends. You can get distracted by them, you can worry about them, or as a leader, you can actually practically break them down and think about whether they really impact your business here today, and if they do, what your response and communication approach is going to be as a leader with your people. So let's dive into the local market and just paint the scene on what's happening in talent attraction. So I've just got a couple of statistical slides to bring that to life. This one I really like, the ANZ Job Series. It's pretty reliable and it's been around for a long time, and it tends to aggregate what's happening in the proactive job volume space or market in Australia. And as you can see, where we are in 2018 is not particularly spectacular in terms of total job volume. And as a veteran in talent attraction in the Australian market, looking at the executive space, I still fondly look back on 2007, 2008. It's probably the peak market conditions that we've ever seen. But as always, the devil's in the detail, because there are a few things happening behind that total volume number. And I've added one here, which is the change in the visa situation in Australia. So about 12 months ago, quite a significant change structurally in terms of the way that organisations could sponsor talent, particularly in salary terms between 100 and 150,000 in salary. So many organisations across multiple sectors were plugging talent issues with visa or sponsored talent. Now, the interesting thing is, 4 or 5 years down the track after bringing someone internationally into a business, often people would become permanent. So they would become a longer-term feature of our economy. They'd become a longer-term feature of our job market. And a few people have touched on it today. They actually contribute to the diversity of thought in business. So there's a big debate about whether the visa changes are actually a positive thing. But there's no doubt about it, in the context of 2018, it is starting to have quite a significant effect on the ability for organisations to solve talent challenges, particularly in the salary bracket of 100 to 150K. This slide was presented to us by Paul Bloxham from HSBC at the beginning of the year, and I've actually, I see Paul on a quarterly basis just to catch up economically on what's driving the job market. He's a really insightful guy. And I think one of the things that he talks a lot about is the granular detail at a state-by-state level. So the really interesting thing about 2018, so not necessarily a peak market in total terms, but in terms of job volume, the intensity on the East Coast is quite dramatic. So New South Wales and Victoria firing at the same time is a very unusual situation. And I think this slide points to possibly a perfect storm in terms of talent attraction in the next 18 to 24 months, because if the mining and resources-led states, Queensland and WA, start to upshift in terms of their demand for talent, particularly in technical areas like engineering, we're going to have an open war for really good people in the marketplace. So there's a lot of intensity out there in New South Wales and Victoria at the moment, and that trend could continue if Queensland and WA jump in. Just before I jump to the next slide, who would classify themselves in the room as someone who is actively seeking a new opportunity at the C-suite? Okay, one person, two people. So it's either everyone's very, very happy where they are, or they're not keeping an eye on the market. But I'll share what I'm seeing in terms of CEO searches and then give you some flavour around that. So my personal focus with Future You Established is moving CEOs around the marketplace, and there's 5 key categories that I talk to people about. So the first one is startups. And the interesting thing about startups is that most CEOs say to me, I'm not relevant for that sector because I haven't done a startup. But the reality is a lot of the startups that were founded in markets like Sydney in the last 2 to 3 years are starting to grow up, and the founders are acknowledging, usually through the guidance of an advisory board and then a formal board position, that actually they need to evolve in terms of the C-suite that they bring into the business. And so identifying CEOs that have skill sets from larger organisations to go into that environment is a really interesting inflow of talent at the moment. The enterprise level across the ASX and the multinationals is reasonably active, but often solved from within. So it's quite rare for those businesses not to be well succession planned, and therefore as an external person trying to break into it, it can be quite tricky. Although there are breaks in that cycle, and financial services at the moment is a good example where we probably will see some change in terms of the type of backgrounds and the sector expertise that they bring in. The other thing that disrupts that market is private equity, and the PE firms in Australasia are in a difficult position at the moment. They've got more capital access than they've ever had before, but they're finding it very difficult to deploy it into the Australian market. So one of my roles is finding CEOs that have great ideas to disrupt a mature market and introducing them to the PE firms. And when they find that, usually they'll go forward. And the other two there, family and privately owned companies, present really interesting opportunities. I know there are a few people in the room that have done very, very well as chief execs in that type of environment. It takes a particular type of CEO, in my opinion, to be successful, and obviously the relationship with the family and the drivers in the family are very important. And increasingly, the fifth one there, I think 10 years ago, that was a conversation that probably would have been raised when someone was ending or getting towards the end of what they classified as their career phase, and they were thinking about board appointments. what I see now is a lot more energy all the way through the career journey to start thinking about how I can contribute more broadly in a portfolio capacity. So Warren touched on the idea of the advisory board scenario, and I would say to anyone in the room that has a longer term vision of becoming a board member, that is a fantastic place to start a portfolio career. So that's a little bit about the talent attraction space and what's happening in terms of trend. The next section I want to concentrate on is really focused around what we're seeing from a talent development perspective, some of the best things that we see out there. And I want to start with this slide and just provide a little bit of background. So what I'm trying to capture here is not a new term, it's been around for a long time, which is an organisation's intangible capital. And there's two key parts of that cycle that I'm particularly interested in terms of what we do at Future You, which is the human capital component, which often then leads into the strategic capital component. And what I've witnessed in 2017, 2018 is the commencement of an uneven playing field in many sectors, because some organisations get those two areas and are doing a lot about them within their organisations, and others seriously don't get it at all and are missing a massive trick, particularly around motivating, leading, engaging great people. And we heard an example up here halfway through this morning, which I think really resonates with what I'm trying to say there. Some organisations get it, some organisations don't get it. But I've put the U in the middle there, not for branding purposes, but because at the heart of that is the decisions that we all make as leaders within businesses, and the actions that we take on a day-to-day basis fuel intangible capital or leave it feeling like it's not being utilised. These organisations ranked last year as employers of choice in the context of the Australasian market. And some of them are multinationals and some of them are local success stories, but in the context of the Australian market last year, they were voted very favourably from an employment perspective by their employees. So to win an award, they were effectively engaged by their internal stakeholders, and to touch on Kadu's point, probably at the internal customer experience that people were living and breathing as an employee within that business. Now, a mate of mine is a guy called Dominic Price, and Dom is a work futurist at Atlassian. So he's got a really cool job. He basically goes around the world telling everybody what Atlassian does on a day-to-day basis to drive outcomes and results. His role wasn't always like that. It used to be 80% internal, but the founders said to him a while ago, actually, we want you to go and help organisations around the world understand what we do, because maybe it would be useful for people. So I called Dom yesterday morning, and he was at a conference in Vegas, I suppose as you do if you're in that tech game. And I said to him, what's at the heart of success at Atlassian in terms of the employee value proposition? Why do people like coming into Atlassian? How do they feel from a development point of view, and why do you keep them? And he summed it up like this, so let me just show you his thoughts. So if I was summarising that, and I've been fortunate enough to spend a fair bit of time at Atlassian, and we've brought them into Future You to help train our leadership group in terms of their weekly behaviour with teams. I'd focus on a very, very clear sense at the top in terms of what they get out of bed to achieve, but it resonates through their value system. So it's quite easy for anybody in that organisation to understand what they need to do, when they need to do it, and probably most importantly, what the operational cadence or rhythm of that business is, not quarterly or annually, but literally on a week-by-week basis. It's very, very clear and works very well for them. So I'm going to share now a TEDx talk, which is one of my favourites, and it touches on 21st century leadership and what we all need to be thinking about moving forward. And there's 3 simple messages in here from an absolute guru at BCG. So I'll let you watch the video. It goes for about 4.5 minutes. And I'm interested then just to do a quick poll out of the 3 things that are raised, which one resonates the most with you. So let's play the video.
In a 21st century world, which is more global, digitally enabled and transparent, with faster speeds of information flow and innovation, and where nothing big gets done without some kind of a complex matrix, relying on traditional development practices will stunt your growth as a leader. In fact, traditional assessments like narrow 360 surveys or outdated performance criteria will give you false positives, lulling you into thinking that you are more prepared than you really are. Leadership in the 21st century is defined and evidenced by 3 questions. Where are you looking to anticipate the next change to your business model or your life? The answer to this question is on your calendar. Who are you spending time with? On what topics? Where are you traveling? What are you reading? And then how are you distilling this into understanding potential discontinuities? And then making a decision to do something right now so that you're prepared and ready. There's a leadership team that does a practice where they bring together each member collecting, here are trends that impact me, here are trends that impact another team member, and they share these and then make decisions to course correct a strategy or to anticipate a new move. Great leaders are not head down, they see around corners, shaping their future, not just reacting to it. The second question is, what is the diversity measure of your personal and professional stakeholder network? You know, we hear often about good old boy networks, and you know, they're certainly alive and well, many institutions. But to some extent, we all have a network of people that we're comfortable with. So this question is about your capacity to develop relationships with people that are very different than you. And those differences can be biological, physical, functional, political, cultural, socioeconomic. And yet, despite all these differences, they connect with you and they trust you enough to cooperate with you in achieving a shared goal. Great leaders understand that having a more diverse network is a source of pattern identification at greater levels and also of solutions, because you have people that are thinking differently than you are. The third question, are you courageous enough to abandon a practice that has made you successful in the past? There's an expression, go along to get along. But if you follow this advice, chances are, as a leader, you're going to keep doing what's familiar and comfortable. Great leaders dare to be different. They don't just talk about risk-taking, they actually do it. And one of the leaders shared with me the fact that the most impactful development comes when you are able to build the emotional stamina to withstand people telling you that your new idea is naive or reckless or just plain stupid. Now, interestingly, the people that will join you are not in your usual suspects in your network. They're often people that think differently and therefore are willing to join you in taking a courageous leap. And it's a leap, not a step. More than traditional leadership programs, answering these 3 questions will determine your effectiveness as a 21st century leader. So what makes a great leader in the 21st century? I've met many, and they stand out. They are women and men who are preparing themselves not for the comfortable predictability of yesterday, but also for the realities of today and all of those unknown possibilities of tomorrow. Thank you.
So just quickly on those, so anticipating change, hands up if that one hit the mark with you. Okay. Diversity of network, I mean, I think the CEO Institute's a great example of that, by the way, but diversity of network, the importance of that. Okay, a few. And then abandoning something that's made you successful in the past. Yeah, I'd say that's probably the winner, and that's my favourite as well. And there's nothing like going from a major business, which is where I was, to doing a startup as a way to shock you into thinking about having to do things differently or abandon things that have made you successful. So let me just share with you what we're seeing in the local market from a thought leadership perspective, if I can get it to jump through. Sorry guys, can't seem to get it to move forward. Cool. So when we go across the marketplace at FutureU, these are some of the key things that really stand out in terms of forward-thinking leadership development. And they're being, as golden threads, they're starting to be woven into organisations of all sizes out there. There's two that I think are quite relevant. So coaching around thought leadership. So everybody in this room has amazing thought IP, but sometimes how you share that, how you communicate that internally within an organisation, and probably more importantly for your own personal brand and for the company that you work for, getting that out into the marketplace is sometimes a real blockage for senior people. So coaching around thought leadership, distilling an idea down and sharing it is something that we see quite a bit of. Another one which, again, falls under the radar quite regularly is transition coaching. And so when you think of transition coaching, a lot of people think, well, that's got to be outplacement. Simon's thinking about how people are removed from organisations. But in 2018, some of the most successful moves that we've seen in the market have involved investment from the new employer or sometimes the senior individual making the move in terms of transition coaching into the new role and making sure that it's a real success in the first 6 to 12 months. So that's quite a specific form of executive coaching which is really cottoning on. And again, some organisations are using it now in terms of taking a great person and making them successful in a new role. The other one that's really focused at the moment is using purpose and values as a commercial lens. So I touched on the Atlassian example and the way that Atlassian make life very simple for people to understand who they are and how they play a part. But I thought just to bring it back down to reality, and two guys in a coffee shop a couple of years ago, I'd share with you what we've done at FutureU from a purpose and values perspective, because you don't have to be Atlassian to gain clarity through getting that piece right. So our purpose is the power to connect without limitation, and some of you know this, but it was an absolute head-banging exercise once we worked out what we were going to call our business to come up with the purpose that would drive it. And it took us about 2 months to get that distilled down to a really, really simple phrase that people could relate to. And when we talk about that in the context of FutureU, it means different things to different people, and I think that's the whole point of purpose, is that there is a common understanding of what it is, but it allows an individual to make it their own. Because if it's something that people can't relate to and they can't thread it into their personal purpose, you'll lose them. With the purpose set, we then created our value system. So that's our set of values, and again, in the organisation, everybody has a personal favourite, but I think, like the purpose, it's a set of values that allows an individual to interpret and think about what they want to do with that on a day-to-day basis. My favourite one is challenge the status quo, followed closely by your own voice. So making sure that you have that energy in an organisation for people to speak up and tell you what they think. And what we've experienced from 2 people to 100 is the difficulty that you have as the organisation becomes more sizable in terms of people still feeling confident and comfortable to be able to use their own voice in the business. But probably one of the most magical things about our journey was that we pulled a leadership together from a really diverse background, and we had an opportunity, and I think it was a one-off opportunity early last year, to actually say to them, this is what we think it looks like, but we want you to make it your own as a team. And so rather than 2 or 3 people at the top of the organisation dictating what it looked like, we went to a much larger group of approximately 25 people who had the opportunity to bring it to life. And I just want to share that experience with you in a very short clip for about 1.5 minutes.
I wanted people to genuinely start thinking about what their purpose is, why they've joined Future You, what they're trying to achieve in life, and to really gain a closer understanding of the power to connect without limitation, how they can personally bring that to life. Life's Too Short is about taking personal accountability for fully integrating all aspects of your life, but acknowledging that it's always going to change. For the Greater Good is about bringing to life our brand, Future You, and working with people who are struggling to do that. Your Own Voice is about being involved in a business that's the best practical MBA you could possibly hope for, and standing up and being counted. Focused on You is all about the way that we engage with customers, both client and candidate, and always putting them before our own needs. Challenge the Status Quo is our way of reminding everybody that success here at Future You is about insight, and based on insight, innovation, and based on innovation, disruption. I think the moment we stop challenging the status quo is the moment we become just another recruitment company. What I was blown away by, and what I didn't realise, was how much progress we've made as an organisation by staying true to always thinking about what we do with the lens of purpose and values in mind, and I was really proud of that.
So, really fun exercise to bring that together. You might have noticed that Richard was there with the going paddle boating, so we had some fun that day, but I think the key thing was we actually got to visualise our purpose and values and for everyone to feel like they owned it. And that's been very, very important for us in terms of our journey so far. Going one step further with it though, what it enabled us to do as an organisation was actually create our competency framework. So the way that we performance manage and the way that we metrics the business stems from that purpose and that values flow. So we did the same exercise with the same group of people a few months later and got to a really good place in terms of very quickly understanding what performance looked like in the context of Future You. And we brought a lot of colour into it to bring it to life and make it easy for people to visualise and remember. But it's been a great exercise. On our journeys around the marketplace, we see a lot of leadership teams creating this for the first time, if it's not there, or reinventing what is already in place and making it more authentic in terms of allowing a team underneath to work out how they own it on a day-to-day basis. But coming back to one of the key reasons why people are choosing to stay in organisations at the moment in Australia, it's that sense of I belong, I have ownership, I can have an impact here, regardless of whether that is a top 100 ASX or a startup environment. That is an absolute golden thread at the moment in terms of talent retention in the marketplace. So I've got a workshop scenario that I want to spend some time on with everybody today, and it's really about if there was 2 or 3 things that you would think about changing from a leadership behaviour perspective and to go back into your organisation and put in place literally this afternoon, what would they look like? So we'll break into our tables and do that. Just to give you a bit of inspiration on that topic before we do it, we actually went out to the market and we asked some senior professionals that we've worked with in the past who are in salary terms between 150 and 250K, we asked them to explain to us what they thought good leadership looks like. and what type of organisation they would want to join. So I've got 4 people who are very kind to share their views via video. So let me just play that clip to give you a bit of inspiration, and then we'll break into the group exercise.
Of a leader that I'm looking for in an organisation is one that truly cares, not just about the business, but about the people in it and how it impacts them. And they should show care through their words and actions. Also, for me, it's really about respect at all levels of the hierarchy, because we all play a part in the organisation. And lastly, for me, it's really important for a leader to really be inspiring and be passionate for what they believe in, because at the end of the day, they are our leaders and should be leading by example.
I would start by looking for an organization with a strong and reputable name in the marketplace. Importantly, it would have to be an organization with very strong ethical and moral standards, and one with a respectful and collaborative work culture and ethic. In my experience, this is very important because many organizations end up having conflict between divisions because of competing and conflicting KPIs. This only ends up wasting resources and frustrating internal teams and demotivating them. And when it comes to leadership, I would above all look for a strong leader who's driven by a genuine vision that infects and energizes those around them, not just one who takes a corporate vision and mechanically executes it down the organization.
The way they manage the business, actions, transparency and integrity, I think are, for myself, the most important things for any business or leader. I think the way the market's moving, that's what any consumer-facing business is judged on these days. So I'm looking for a mentor, and primarily aside from business as usual aspects and key technical aspects, I want someone I can look up to from a transparency and integrity point of view. And I believe, as part of being a mentor, it's to help you get to where you want to be, and also to inspire those that work below them. And that's the type of person I'd like to be one day. So I'd like to work with someone that draws inspiration in not just what they do, but how they do things.
A leader's ability and willingness to embrace change and actively seek to change and, I suppose, evolve as an organisation. Because unfortunately what happens is when leaders don't embrace change and they don't encourage people to, I suppose, become change agents at every level of the business, what we see is those organisations typically fall behind, and the cultures become quite toxic in terms of people realise that there's areas of opportunity to change, but they don't actively seek to, I suppose, seek solutions. So a big one for leadership would be the willingness and the ability to embrace change and develop leaders and evangelists at every stage of the organisation. And when it comes to an organisation, one of the biggest traits I would be looking for if I was to make a career change would be, I suppose, cultures whereby there's a keenness for collaboration and cooperation, because when there's too much aggressive competition internally within an organisation, it can become very counterproductive, and we nurture quite toxic working environments whereby no one is working together and cooperating and seeking to collaborate across departments and such, and it can become really, really toxic for the employees within the business, and subsequently that has a detrimental impact on the organisation's ability to move forward and progress. So those would be the big things. So leadership and a willingness and an ability to change and embrace change and nurture leaders and evangelists at every stage of the organisation, and then a collaborative and cooperative working environments.
So last night I played that clip a couple of times, and I wrote down the words that resonated the most through that group, and I really appreciate those people for being brave enough to be captured on video and share their thoughts. Because when you're interviewing candidates, these are the things that are going through their minds, right? And they're playing a game, in terms of going through an interview process, which today is not as formal as it once was. But at the end of the day, there's also a lot of things going through their mind in terms of making decisions around who they decide to work with and for. So a couple of key words that jumped out there for me. So respect. the ability of leaders to change or anticipate change, which is interesting, isn't it? Because it came up in that 21st Leadership video as well. Collaboration internally, that was probably the number one thing that was raised by that group. So is there too much internal competition? Are organisations too siloed? And then the final one from me is inspiration. So how does the person that I work for inspire? I want to be, you heard it from the second last person there. I want to be that type of individual one day. How am I being inspired on a day-to-day basis to achieve that? So a couple of key takeaways. So the exercise, I'll just put it up on the screen here for everybody to work through, and we do have a little bit of time. So let's say we'll work within our table groups for 10 minutes on the subject, and then I think with Anne and Tim's help, we might actually go around the room and just hear from 3 or 4 of the tables. So the workshop is what are the key leadership behaviours you want to change or focus on, and that's starting today, not next year or the year after. It's starting today. So what are they? And I'd say let's try and get a long list and then distill that down to 2 key themes per table, please. Okay, let's come back as a main group, and I'll hand over to Anne and Tim, who are going to pick a couple of tables to share their thoughts with us.
It's quite dangerous actually handing over to us, because I was walking around hearing some of the conversations going on, and there were some great conversations and you were all very animated and engaged. And so rather than me come around and pick a table, I thought we might ask first who would like to share some of their thoughts.
Actually, whoa.
I was going to say, if you don't put your hand up...
Yes. Just before you start, you realise you've just taken all the joy out of Anne's day.
No, because they were one of the ones I was going to pick.
Anyway.
I was behind him as he was chatting.
Is that microphone on?
Hello, yep. Okay, we came up with things like collaboration and teamwork, leadership throughout within departments and taking responsibility so that groups work well together, inspiration and passion, energy, vision, communication, strategy and direction from the leader, ethics, which I think is something that I have a feeling has dropped off along the way, being prepared to be different and having diversity within groups so that you get an outcome that is probably better than the individuals, or collectively is a better outcome. Being courageous, innovative, and we think all of that comes together and equals culture.
Very good. Yeah, I mean, good culture is a huge topic at the moment, and it's not just a financial services subject. Everybody needs to look at it, and there are a lot of organisations at the moment just doing a really simple session on that. Let's just revisit culture and define what good is, and then what great is, and then how we communicate it. So that's a good distill. Thank you.
Any other volunteers before we volunteer you? Actually, I volunteer you. Let me pick on table 13. Who would like to be the spokesperson for that? Okay, it's here.
They need your microphone.
Oh, they do. Well, sorry.
Will from Syndicate 42. Ours is pretty simple and came down to effective communication. And what that means, it might be defining the operating rules of the organisation, staff coaching, all of these things. The communication ends up distilling the values. So we had a bit of a discussion around the values and thought they're often airy-fairy. As leaders, we have trouble defining them. And if we have trouble defining them, how do we then communicate those to the various levels within an organisation? So leadership behaviour is all around effective communication and how we get those messages across.
I think it's a really, really good point. I think depending on what an organisation's dealing with, it's also the communication cadence. So it's how intense is the communication, and sometimes that needs to be adjusted in organisations. It's a really, really, really valid point.
Thanks, Will.
We've got a table over here that nominated themselves with Suzanne's help.
Somehow it got put in my hand. We were discussing that just the differences with our businesses and the different size of the organisations too, about how it can, in smaller organisations, there is a feeling of collaboration and inclusiveness, and then as it gets to a certain size, that dynamic changes, and just being aware of that and how we can change that when you are in organisations that are of a larger size. And I think what people were just mentioning there, you know, things like communication and sharing with people that vision. What is that vision? And making sure that they understand what their part of it is. And we also touched on the subject of these young generations and how they want to take our jobs. And I was saying, I think that's one of the best gifts we can have, is when we can have that conversation around, okay, so where is it that you want to get and how we can help them get there. If you can genuinely want to help your team. I'm a big believer in the fact that if you're trying to help somebody get what they want, they'll reciprocate and help you get whatever you want for the business too. So don't have fear around them wanting to take your job, you know, embrace it and be happy. I'd rather have that than somebody who just wants to turn up and wait until 5 to leave. So that's our bit.
I think that's a really good one. There's a couple of theories out there about millennials. They learn from, they love experience. And so sometimes, you know, I give you a classic example at Future You. Our Chief Marketing and Digital Officer has been on maternity leave for the last 9 months, and we have a very enthusiastic person underneath that individual, and I call her CMO. And we have a lot of fun with that, and we've talked a lot about that 9-month period. It's been a real journey of discovery for her. It's had tears, it's had laughter, it's had spectacular successes, it's also had a few failures, but I think the key thing there is that she's really taken that and made it a great experience and learned a lot. And that's allowed us to evolve her role quite significantly post-Sharon coming back from maternity leave. So yeah, it's a really good point. Maybe one more group, please.
I've got one here. I'm going to give the mic to Cameron. Do you want to stand up and introduce yourself?
Cameron Martin from Syndicate 41. We talked about being a good leader, and it really relates to being able to inspire your team. And then we discussed, what does inspiration really mean? And for us, it was about purpose and why. Why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we here? How are we helping people? How are we, changing people's lives? We also talked about being aware that we need to continuously do that, and the fact that we can't just let months and months go by without inspiring our people, because the message gets lost. And we thought we need to continually, convey that message to the people to ensure that it doesn't get lost in the day-to-day.
Yeah, some really good points there. I think personal purpose and how that translates into the organisations, that's a critical one. So one of the questions when I'm interviewing someone at the level of everybody in the room here, one of my first questions, I don't spend too much time on CVs these days. What I really try to get to the heart of in the first hour with somebody is what holistically, what are they all about? And one of my favourite questions is, when you get out of bed in the morning, what are you passionate about? And in the current context of your role and the company that you're part of, do you feel 100% passion when you wake up? Or are there some mornings where you wake up and it's 80% or it's 70%? And then how do we find that? How do we find a situation where every day is 100% on personal purpose and then passion in business? So thanks for doing the workshop. A couple of key takeouts for me. I won't go through them all, but I think living and breathing purpose is a really fundamental one at the moment, and it relates to the future of work and the generation coming up from underneath. I think that's quite key. And literally, from a leadership point of view, distill it down to what you're doing on a daily basis. Make it here and now, because coming back to the mega trends at the beginning of this presentation, there's two leaders, I think, in the next 2 to 3 years out there to win in the talent game. There's one that worries about what might happen, and there's others that actually go, I've got a great day in front of me and I'm going to do something proactive and really inspire and lead a group of people through what is a constant change environment now. Thank you very much.
Great. Simon, just before we go, I've got one question for you. So I sort of have this view that leadership is actually a contact sport. If there was one characteristic of a really good leader in an organisation that you look for, what actually is that characteristic? What's the thing that everyone should aspire to do more of, be more of?
It's a really good question, Tim. So probably the most black and white market that I recruit for is private equity. And so what private equity try and do is set an operating rhythm and a pace and intensity on a life journey for a company which is very aggressive. And to achieve that outcome, they need a chief executive officer that can really turn the dial. Now, that's not always delivered in the right way, depending on their ethos and philosophy, but the common trait of a CEO in that type of environment is they really do know how to change an organisation, transform an organisation, and not lose key people along the way. So they'll often refer to, the getting the right team together and then taking that group on the journey. So it's often a rough journey in terms of the tough decisions that need to be made. But I think that's the standout feature is can you play a significant part in terms of changing and transforming something rather than just operating status quo.
Brilliant. Great. Simon, thank you. Please join me again in thanking Simon. Thanks.